I'm going to call the meeting to order. We'll start with roll call.
Director Assad Lucas.
Here.
Director Battistelli.
Here.
Director Goldstein.
Here,
Director Marsh Holshin.
Here.
Director Potter.
Here.
I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Director Assad Lucas.
Aye.
Director Battistelli.
Aye.
Director Goldstein.
Aye.
Director Marsh Holshin.
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
I'll entertain a motion to recess for an executive session to discuss the possible acquisition of real estate near the Thornton High School campus and to receive legal advice regarding such acquisition pursuant to Board Policies 2.0, General Operating Limitations, and 2.5, Asset Protection, and Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-4024A and B.
So moved. Second.
Director Assad Lucas.
Aye.
Director Battistelli.
Aye.
Director Goldstein.
Aye.
Director Marsh Holshin.
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
We'll be back. Okay, I'm going to reconvene our meeting. And looks like we're on the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise if you are able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, if there's no objection, we're gonna skip over superintendent update and comments. And we're gonna and the liaison reports, and we're gonna skip to board business policy matters since policy matters is here. Is there any objection? Okay, Heather, Katie. Stephanie will get you hooked up.
Test. Oh, it works. Okay, perfect. Hi, Test. Okay, now it's working. Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see you. I'm Heather Retzko, and I'm so excited to introduce to you the newest member of the Policy Matters team, Katie Hancock. Katie, do you want to give a little background about yourself to the board and superintendent?
Hi, so nice to be here. So nice to meet you all in person. Like she said, my name's Katie. Most of my background is in social work. I was recently the policy intern for Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and then spent the last year as the senior legislative aide for Senator Janet Buckner. I'm so excited to be joining the Policy Matters team, and please let me know how I can be helpful to you all.
And I think, as you all know, Senator Buckner is the chair of the Senate Education Committee, so Katie brings a wealth of knowledge in education and also just incredible relationships with both the Senate and House Education Committees. So tonight we wanted to give you just a quick local election recap, talk about the state budget, which I know has been top of mind for a lot of folks and in the news, some of the things we're hearing coming down the pike in terms of legislation, and then important upcoming dates that we are engaged in. So Katie's going to give you a quick election recap.
The 8th Congressional District was a big kind of upset, I think. Gabe Evans beat out incumbent Yadira Caraveo. As for the state legislature, our status quo was mostly maintained. So Democrats maintained the majority in the Senate. The Democrats maintain a majority in the House. However, it is under question whether we'll retain the supermajority. House Districts 16 and 19 have been called for Republicans, but are under recount. So we're just waiting to see how that ends up. For Adams County changes, so Representatives Wiseman and Dougherty have moved to the Senate. And so 5 new elected representatives and 1 new elected senator will be representing Adams County. They are Lisa Ferret, who comes from a housing and healthcare background, Jackie Phillips, Michael Carter, they're both attorneys, Carlos Barron, who is from the oil and gas industry, Chris Richardson, a veteran, and then Scott Bright, who comes from an education background.
And I would just add for that 8th Congressional District, we've been really fortunate to work with Representative Gabe Evans at the state legislature. He's always been a great advocate for Adams 12, and we invited him. I know we've got an upcoming elected officials dinner, and he is currently in DC, but he has that invite, and we're hopeful that he is able to make it. So.
So as for kind of the leadership at the Capitol, for the Senate, we saw a major overhaul of leadership in the majority. So Senator James Coleman is the new president of the Senate. Senator Robert Rodriguez maintains as the majority leader. And then we have Senator Michaelson Janae and Senator Cutter have moved to be the president pro tem and the assistant majority leader. Minority Leader Senator Paul Lundeen and Senator Cleve Simpson as the Assistant Minority Leader, and Minority Whip Senator Janice Rich. Thankfully, I worked closely with Senator Lundeen and Senator Rich as they both sat on the Education Committee last year. For the House, leadership remained pretty much the same. So Rep. McCluskey as the Speaker, Rep. Duran as the Majority Leader, and then Rep. Bacon as the Assistant Majority Leader, Rep. Puglisi as the Minority Leader, Rep. Winter as the Assistant Minority Leader, and Rep. Armagost as the Minority Whip.
So the big conversation, as I mentioned right now, is certainly over at the Joint Budget Committee. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of the governor's budget request in a minute, but the big change in the Joint Budget Committee this year was Senator Rachel Zenzinger from Arvada. She termed out. There was a race for a new member of the Joint Budget Committee, and Representative Juby Amabile from Boulder won that race. And so we're very grateful to still have Shannon Bird as vice chair. She, of course, brings a wealth of knowledge to the JBC, is a fierce advocate for Adams 12, and Senator Bridges was elected chair. The rest of the members have stayed the same. Where things are at right now with the Joint Budget Committee, so on November 1st, the governor, as anticipated, submitted his budget request for the upcoming fiscal year. As anticipated, it's just a really challenging year. We knew that there were going to be quite a few cuts recommended. We were looking at potentially $1 to $1.5 billion in cuts based on the prior revenue forecast. And so we received that budget request, which we'll talk through in a second. And right now, the Joint Budget Committee has just begun this week the staff briefings. And so they're hearing from the Joint Budget Committee staffers from each of the departments, just kind of an analysis and recommendations for those departments based on the governor's budget request. So overall, it's just a really, really challenging year. I think a lot of the challenges on our budget are certainly driven to caseload increases, especially in Medicaid. There's a lot of pressures on Medicaid given the post-COVID public health emergency unwind, an increase in certainly acuity of care. People are needing just a lot more healthcare services and a lot higher degree of services, and then also just increases in common policies, keeping the 15% reserve, which is really important to the Joint Budget Committee members and the governor. So all of those increases, in account, we are looking at a budget that's short $640 million going into the next fiscal year. And so some of the key proposals from the budget that the governor recommended are, he asked each of his departments to look at a 1% across the board operating reduction. 1% only saves $5.5 million, and so there's been a lot of conversations with the JBC on, is that enough? Is that, should we be looking elsewhere? They're looking at swapping a lot of the cash funds into general fund. They are sweeping interest earnings. They're doing all sorts of different sort of tricks to try to bring down that $640 million. They're also one of the big, I realized our bullet got a little messed up, but one of the big things that they're talking about is privatizing Pinnacle and using that money that they brought in from Pinnacle to help with the para-solvency. The governor has spoken a lot about this budget request, and I think it's going to be one of the more controversial requests, one of the more potentially expensive requests, and one of the more challenging requests to figure out just how to do in practice. So something we'll certainly be following really closely. Specific to K-12, the conversation has been very interesting. His budget request asks for an additional $115 million of general fund for K-12, and that's through the House Bill 241448, which was the new school finance formula that was passed last year. The interesting thing about this is And I know we talked with you all a lot, and Superintendent Godowski worked really hard during the negotiations of that bill. It was not supposed to go into effect if we were in a budget situation like we're in, but here we are, and I think that they're working to try to figure out how to make it go into effect. So one of the things they've recommended is implementing it over 7 years instead of 6 years. And then the really big kicker is eliminating the 4-year averaging for districts, eliminating it in whole, which is estimated to cost districts about $190 million. I think the juxtaposition that we're working within is the request, in effect, feels like they're wanting to invest in education, but at the same time cutting over here through this elimination of averaging. And so we're grateful to have Gina and Superintendent Godowski, who's spoken to a lot of these folks and the press about the challenging impact that would have on our budget, even if they were to implement this new 1448 formula with the $115 investment. So certainly something that we're going to be paying very close attention to. Those JBC members that I talked about have K-12 front and center of their priorities. They feel like, this is in effect a cut to K-12 and really want to look at different ways to balance the budget. But I do think that averaging is going to be front and center of negotiations and conversation this session, and something that we'll be certainly engaged in. There are a few additional requests from CDE and the governor, including capping the BEST cash grants, which have been growing. They're also asking to move some of those cash funds into the actual operating of K-12 to help fund that $115 million. They're recommending sweeping some money from the Electrifying School Buses program. They've said that they've been able to secure federal funding for that. One good piece of news is they are requesting an additional increase of $23 million to help support CCAP. So that's something that we'll be certainly paying close attention to. And then there's a few additional one-time fund requests to support things like training on the READ Act, support for the Attendance Works Challenge, different things like that. But I think those one-time requests are certainly going to be something that the JBC members are talking about at a time when we're cutting base core minimum costs. How are we sort of looking to do one-time investments? And then Katie's going to talk about the mill levy override working group, which has been a topic of conversation since last year.
Yeah, so just wanted to give you all a quick overview of their most recent meeting. As y'all know, this working group started because of the concerns Superintendent Godowski raised on 1448. So in terms of the district survey that they sent out, 22 school districts responded. Most reported that they wanted to see a funding increase of either 50 cents or $1 per dollar of mill levy override revenue. The match money that they've utilized has been used for different purposes, mostly purposes voters approved, general operating expenses, and then, or they're split between the general and capital reserve program. Some of the concerns raised by school districts include, what the reliability of the funding is, the need for guaranteed ongoing funding, and they also need it to be easily communicated with people in the district. So some of the highlights, the committee is considering 3 possibilities for the program. There's the $100,000 floor with 30% maximum percentage, what the cost is to reach median production per pupil, which Gina has been working on behind the scenes, thankfully, and then a layered approach of what those 2 options would look like together. So the next steps are the Legislative Council staff will report data on what each of these would look like in different districts. The working group members should have that by late November. And then they'll have their final meeting the first week of December where they will make final recommendations.
Could you elaborate on the $100,000 floor with the 30% maximum percentage? What's that mean?
We might need to phone a friend from Gina. Gina, just a shout out to Gina. She has been incredible and is always called to as an expert at the Capitol, especially in this space. So,
Thank you. Good evening, board. So what is being proposed is having a minimum amount of funding for districts who are eligible and then a maximum amount of funding. So one of the things that Superintendent Godowski has shared is in the last batch of funding, there were 3 districts in Colorado Springs who received, gosh, I'm going from memory, 96% of the funds. It was absurd. One district got over $9 million of the $23 million. So the committee is looking at, should there be a floor, the smallest amount a district could receive to make these funds meaningful? And should there be a cap so that no one can get that huge amount?
Might I ask a follow-up question about that? If I remember correctly, part of the issue with those 3 districts receiving 96% of the fund is that the formula they used to calculate that was not transparent. So in the most recent conversations, have they contributed to this transparency in any way? Do we have a better understanding of how they're deciding who gets what?
So there are certain people on the work group who are committed to keeping the formula the way it is. And the piece of the formula that I think Superintendent Godowski shared with you that is the actual problem is there's an income component for the community that assumes every community, based on the income, should have 25 mills for their mill levy override. If they're a lower income district, then that could go down to 15 mills. If they're a higher income district, it could go to 35 mills. And the problem with that logic is 25 mills, as we have, I think that horse might be dead, does not equal the same thing across districts. So for us, I don't remember the math, but for example, Boulder is 2/3 higher than us with 1 mill. So that is the flaw in the formula. It's assuming we should have 25 mills because our, and I'm doing air quotes, community can afford it.
Thank you.
any other questions on that one? Great. And so just a few upcoming dates to flag for you. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're starting those briefings and hearings from all of the departments. So on the 2nd, we've got the briefing for the Department of Early Childhood. The 3rd is the Department of Education. And then the 5th is the Department of Education specific to school finance. And then the big thing in December that we're all looking to is the December 19th forecast. And that will give us a starting point to see if that $690 million that we talked about at the beginning, if that's truly where we're going to be, if revenues came in higher, if they came in lower. It's sort of a level set as we go into the actual hearings and to figure setting with the Joint Budget Committee. And then the session begins on the 8th. We'll start sending out legislation, meeting with members of the delegation, lots of excitement there for the next 120 days after the 8th. And then if you have any questions, this is our contact information. We're always happy to answer anything that you have and be a resource to you. So any other questions for our team?
Any questions?
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, and nice to meet you, Katie.
So as the ladies are walking off, I'll just share that, we have a legislative dinner planned for, I believe, December 11th or thereabouts. And one of the things that we want to spend some time on is telling more of the story about school finance and how it affects Adams 12. Last year, as 1448 was being debated and the levy override matching was something we were advocating about, we realized that many members of our delegation really don't understand the nuts and bolts of school finance, and they don't understand some of the important attributes of a community like Adams 12, like our low property tax base compared to many peer districts. So Gina and myself, and perhaps others will be ready to do some quick educating of our delegation. We think that'll be helpful later in the session.
Thank you. Okay. While we're on ad-libbing our agenda and kind of moving it around, I'm gonna, without objection, we are going to go to monitoring reports, 2.9 charter schools. And Aubrey has been waiting here. We're going to expedite her report. But first of all, before you start, see if I have to make a motion. Okay, I do. So I will entertain a motion to acknowledge that the board has received a monitoring report as of November 20th, 2024 for the period July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024 of the superintendent concerning board policy 2.9 charter schools, and finds the superintendent's interpretations are reliable and supported by data that is relevant, justified, and complete.
So moved. Second.
All right, Aubrey, now you can begin.
Hi, everyone. I know that you received monitoring report 2.9, and I wanted to go over some of the highlights. The first being, this report is split into 3 separate sections. The first having an A and B. For section 1A, we reported data that the charter schools right now have access to district policies, board policies, and operating limitations via the district website. They also are notified when any district policies are changed, edited, or if there's an adoption of a new policy. And when that notification comes to them, they are given an opportunity for discussion through a monthly meeting facilitated by myself, Director of Charter Partnerships. So if they have any questions or want more information, that would be answered during that monthly meeting. The report also included the terms of our charter school contracts. 3 of our charter schools, Westgate Community School, Prospect Ridge Academy, and Stargate Charter School, are currently on 5-year renewals. The New America School is on a 2-year renewal, which will expire on June 30th of 2025 at the end of this school year. They are currently in a renewal process that my office is facilitating at this moment. And we will be making a renewal decision on their application no later than February 1st. Let's see. The report also included the district waivers for the 2 charter schools that underwent renewal during the monitoring period, which were Prospect Ridge Academy and Stargate Charter School. Their district waivers were linked in the policy or the monitoring report that you received. The New America School and Westgate Community School were not in renewal during the monitoring period, so they did not submit any new district policy waivers. The Office of Charter Schools also monitors all compliance requirements for the charter schools annually. We conduct a detailed review that goes through their contractual requirements. We have a benchmarks and assurances document that's shared with the charter schools. It's a living document that outlines when the deliverables are expected. Every charter school leader has access to this, and we make sure that they're complying with all the benchmarks. This is not for the monitoring period, but we did want to include that the district has adopted a new software system called Anvilar, which will be rolled out shortly. And that's where we will move that benchmarks and assurances document into a benchmark schedule through this software. That will be hopefully being rolled out in January of this year. And it will streamline our submission process for both the charter schools and our Adams 12 district staff. We have 2 opportunities to meet monthly with charter school staff and leaders, one through a partnership meeting, which is school-specific, and one through collaboration meetings with all charter school leaders. And we also put out an annual performance monitoring analysis for each charter school you can see that linked in the report that you received. And the final piece, there were no protests of the superintendent's interpretations of policy or any decisions that were submitted by charter school boards during the monitoring period. Do you have any questions?
I don't have questions. I have some thoughts.
Love to hear.
The first is, I noticed in the policy wording on page 2, we talk about the charter school board appeal process. And I think a lot of the feedback changes that Phil is planning for public comments to the board or public, the language that you sent us recently for the feedback channel for people to submit appeals, concerns, et cetera, to the board. I can't remember the policy, but I gave you a couple of wording options. I wonder if it also applies here, but that's neither here nor there. The other thought I have is looking at the internal monitoring report, I see that there's a lot of, in this new software system you have and in these meetings and checks that you have, that there's a lot of monitoring that the district does. But what I'm missing, I guess, as I look at the internal monitoring report, is how any concerns that may come up in those district reports come back to the board. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that would end up in that annual report that was linked in, I think it's on page, let me see, page 5. That would come out through those school ratings. If you open that document, they're separated into certain topics, and they're either on track, partially on track, or not on track. And you can open up that document that's linked at the top, and it'll go through all the comments of where you might see some of those concerns.
So my question is, and I guess this is more of a question for the superintendent and the district, is whether or not we need some sort of accounting for that in the internal monitoring report too, to say the charter schools are meeting the policies set forth by the board through the district's guidance on those policies, just to provide that additional check and balance, I guess. And again, I'm open to other interpretations, suggestions, or ideas, but that's just one observation I wanted to make.
Okay, thank you.
So Paula, this may or may not be responsive to the interest you're expressing. One of the challenges with monitoring reports in terms of a monitoring tool about policy compliance is it's a once-a-year report. And so in between that time, what I and others on staff try to do is make judgments about the severity of a non-compliance issue with a charter school and a timing judgment about when you need to know or when we should bring it to your attention. And we try to do that in a way that's similar to how we would bring forward concerns about a performance or a legal non-compliance issue with a district-managed school, so that we're not treating PRA, Stargate, those schools differently, and every time there's a parent complaint or an issue around some alleged non-compliance that we're saying, here they go again, here they go again. We want to do it in the same way that we do with a district-managed school. Right now, for example, we have one of our charters that we have some concerns regarding their staffing of qualified staff to support special education students and some of the risk and vulnerabilities that causes under the contract. But we haven't brought it to your attention collectively yet. We want to see first, I don't think we've got it out the door yet. It's coming soon. And then we'll give the charter school some time to say, here's what we're going to do to respond to that. And then if we feel like we don't see adequate progress of response and there are some concerns about liability, non-compliance with board policy or district policies or meaningful legal vulnerabilities, that would be the point that either Phil Spare or myself would likely say in between monitoring reports, this is something that we feel like you need to know about. But I think the basic rule of thumb is we're trying to use a consistent measurement about when to let you know what the charter schools, similar to the other schools that we manage here in the district. Yeah. So I don't know if that's responsive to what you're interested in or not.
So I'm thinking it's not necessarily that I want to see that drilled down level. I don't want to know every single issue or concern. I mean, and I don't think it's really in our purview to consider that. But I think what would be helpful is to have that high level summary that the, X number, that like this major concern occurred, but it was addressed in the following way. Again, just going back to the superintendent is holding the charter schools responsible for meeting district policy requirements. So anyway, that's just a suggestion, a thought I have. I'm not trying to be a pain in the butt.
I think
Or
it's
maybe I
helpful, and it
am,
looks-
but I'm trying to be nice about it.
No, I don't think you're being a pain. I think you're raising fair questions. I think Bo may have something to add.
Yeah, I wanted to come up and say, has Audrey, as someone new to this position, was working on this monitoring report, she pointed out to me some areas in which she thought it could be improved. And some of, I think, of what you're raising, Paula, is a more descriptive element of this report that talks about school dynamics, issues, successes that capture an entire year in between monitoring reports. So I think what you're specifically interested in is aligned to an interest that Audrey shared with me in continuing to revamp this monitoring report to provide, I think, more depth, that high-level overview of what's happening at these schools individually. And I will just say this applies to other monitoring reports as we go forward. We're very much in a time right now, as you know, of wanting to not just fall in the trap of repeating the cadence because we've done it, but if the board has interest in more information or different information, we're very much open to it. But that happens to be something that Audrey herself was interested in as she looked at this report for the first time.
And I guess I should also add, Audrey, that you're doing a great job. You've
Thank you.
been tossed into all of this, and she's been swimming very nicely in this new sea that she's been dropped into, so I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
The other thing I would add on this, because I think it's helpful for just the broader board to hear, what I hear in your comment, Paula, is really helpful feedback, and it's helpful to hear from others, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but I think we are in this process that Bo's alluded to about trying to calibrate the just right amount of detail and information that we should provide in monitoring reports. When we first adopted policy governance in 2001, there were some monitoring reports that approached 100 pages in length. And they just were like long, tedious, painful things that were really time intensive for staff to prepare. And then over time, the pendulum almost swung the other way, which is there's a policy expectation and interpretation. We'll tersely, briefly, succinctly present some data and say either we're in compliance or we're not. The board will say, we feel like you're doing a reasonable interpretation, giving us legit data, and you'd be done. And I think there's a place in between where people want a little bit more information to know what's going on, to make sure that things that are more conclusory in terms of statements and everything's good, or that we're meeting the expectations of the policy, having a little bit more information in the middle. I think we've heard from the board as an interest dating back to the 1.1 policies that used to be just about data. And I think in recent years, Dave, at the board's request, has done a lot of gathering about what are you doing with curriculum and learning activities in the schools, so that there's more to show about some of the board's expectations in terms of a description. So definitely a work in progress, and I think the next monitoring report you'll see from Audrey and from us on 2.9 will be more in that Goldilocks just right place with more detail.
All right. Anybody else? Thank you, Aubrey.
Thank you.
Call the vote.
Director Assad Lucas,
Aye.
Director Battistelli,
Aye.
Director Goldstein,
Aye.
Director Marsh-Holshin,
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
Okay. All right, let's jump back to reports, updates, and information. And we'll start with the superintendent update.
So just given the small audience out there, I'll probably limit some of the remarks I was planning to make. I want to start with acknowledging my appreciation for our community passing our bond measure at the general election. We're still waiting for official certified results from Adams County and Broomfield County. We should receive those probably next week and can formally present them to the board upon receipt. But we're grateful at this point that by a 55 to 45% margin between Adams and Broomfield counties that measure passed. lots of important investments that'll be transformative for our school district that will come from that, including a new Thornton High School campus that you've heard a little bit more about tonight. On the override side, I am in a position that confirming that you all have also are aware that the override was not successful by kind of the opposite, similar numbers, but the opposite end in terms of yes and no. Unsuccessful by a 45 to 55% vote. It was a little bit more strongly supported in Broomfield than it was in Adams County. And I think there are probably some philosophical and also some financial reasons behind why those two counties voted differently about the measure. Some of the staff that I've been interacting with are disappointed in ways that I understand. We knew from our polling data that there was some angst dating back to the spring and summer about having both measures on the ballot, and especially about passing our mill levy override with a tax rate increase. So the results that we received on both the bond and the override did not stray far from the survey and polling data we got from Magellan earlier in the year. Still feel like it was worth putting those measures on the ballot because we have compelling need for those funds, which I'll talk more about in this slide. There's also times that your voters vote in ways that surprise you and is different than some of the polling and surveys that go on before, and we thought that might happen this time. It did not. And then we also know that in the history of Adams County and lots of the districts, it takes multiple bites at the apple and a lot of education efforts with your community to let them know the needs that you have and to get them to a spot of supporting those needs at the ballot. There's communities like 27J that were unsuccessful, I think, 5 times before they passed their override. There's communities like Adams 14 that haven't passed any ballot measures since 2006. They were successful with 2 items this time, but it's been a long time since they've been successful. Mapleton has had some elections in the past that have been unsuccessful and have had some active business opposition to the request. And so the message I'm sending to staff is, don't be angry with our community. We talk a lot in here that we have the lowest property tax base of any school district in the 15 metro area region. And so when we ask people for funds here, it comes at a disproportionate burden for them in terms of what a mill costs and raises for us than it does in other places. All that said, moving forward, we've got to find the right time to make another request and hopefully get to a yes vote, because I'm confident, for all the reasons you've heard from the Policy Matters team, that the state is not going to help us in a meaningful way. And even though many of them talk about equity quite a bit at the Capitol in terms of the school finance system that their predecessors and some of our recent legislative actions have created, it's not one that's equitable. And one of the primary reasons it's not is because of mill levy override inequities. So I think you have on your screen where things stand after the election. And as we said before, one of the slides that we presented to you on August 28th was one about what happens if others pass their overrides and we do not. And that's proven to be the case when you look at the slide that's in front of you. Aurora's override measure was successful, and it was structured through a no tax rate increase mechanism. They had on the bond side, I'm looking at Gina to correct me if I misstate this, prior authorizations from their voters that gave them a lot more permission to take in revenues greater than what might be needed to pay bond principal and interest and to incur debt. And so they were able to restructure how much they levied to pay their bond debt moving forward, even with $1 billion increase, and still have money that they could move into a permitted override bucket for capital purposes. Gina, anything you want to say on that? I see you. Okay, I'm good to go. That's good to hear. Cherry Creek passed a measure that did come with a tax rate increase, and then Adams 14 initially thought they were unsuccessful. And then in the end, as more ballots were counted through election week, emerged with slight victories or margins of success on both their bond and override. And so what you see here is now we've declined from 13th out of 15th to 14th out of 15th in terms of override revenue. And if we're not able to secure more funds in the next couple of years, 27J will tighten with us, and in the not too distant future will surpass us, because unlike us, they don't have a fixed dollar amount override. They have a fixed mill levy override, which as property values increase, generates significant new revenue each time you have a reassessment. You'll see in the column, some of the red boxes on the right, that some of the numbers we shared with you in August will be bigger next year for districts. You'll see that Boulder Valleys will be growing by over $100 a student. Aurora is going to be growing by close to $750 a student. Westminster's growing by about $170 a student. So a lot of these districts are growing their revenues in a greater amount than us. And there's two reasons for that I believe are true. I'll again ask Gina and Aaron to correct me if I'm mistaken. One of the reasons why that can happen is you can have a fixed mill override that has either you have reassessment and your property values grow, brings in more money, or as you just add more properties to your community for new building and things of that sort, you get some additional funds. And then the second factor is if you have an inflation adjustment in your override, that you can see an increase year over year in how much you get so that you're keeping up with inflation. And for us, we just have a little bit of our $64.5 million roughly of mill levy override revenues that adjust for inflation out of that $27 million override package in 2018. The other half plus of our package just stays fixed dollars and doesn't increase for inflation. And so while you're seeing some of the numbers in these other districts grow more than ours, is that they have a greater percentage of their override that has an inflation adjustment mechanism in it. I'm seeing nodding. So I'm sharing this just to create awareness. I think we have to continue to educate our community that we're not trying to unnecessarily ask for more money from them. We know that families in our community or many places are in a pinch, that our asks come in many cases with a greater out-of-pocket contribution for a $500,000 house here than it would in a Denver or a Boulder. And yet when we fall as significantly far behind many of our peer districts as we have now, it puts us in a really difficult spot as we look to this next budget season around things like compensation, around staffing, and around other necessary services for kids. And especially if the four-year averaging thing that we've talked about a couple of times tonight is removed, we will probably be year over year in a deficit position with less money received next year than this year, even after factoring in some of the inflationary adjustments in the governor's proposal. So money is a big focus of mine. I think it's an important focus of all of us here, and educating our legislators about this December 11th and then leaning hard into conversations at the Capitol will be really important. Other steps that we're taking is it's likely that we'll recommend that we do a survey of our community to get some post-election feedback, either about why they weren't able to support the measure or things that we could do in our measure to make it more appealing. That's helpful information to know. And then I could see us in the late spring of next year coming back to you and exploring the possibility of another polar survey just to see where the temperature of our community is and if it's different from where it was on Election Day this year, so that we can determine if a November ask is prudent, appropriate, or if we should wait for the 2026 election. So money's what's top of mind for me right now, and hopefully this is a good update about some of where we stand. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Chris. All right, on to Board of Education comments, recognition, awards, and vision. Start with Courtney.
Thank you, President Goldstein. I want to start by saying that I had the pleasure of visiting Horizon High School. It was the first time I was there, which kind of was a little surprising to me that I hadn't been out there the previous 3 years. But it's always exciting to get into the schools and kind of get a feel for how the staff is feeling, what the students are doing, the layout of the buildings, and just kind of the overall vibe. And I will say it's one of the cozier high schools that we have. I learned about, when they made the tough decision about whether they were going to replace the carpet with carpet or tile, and they went with carpet, and, the coziness and the hominess that kind of came with that. And so just kind of, like I said, I always love being in our schools and learning all about each of the different kind of energies in each of them. And I just want to say thank you to the team for having me out there. I spent half my day out there learning about all the different things, from their jewelry program to their home ec. Everything they were doing out there is just fantastic. And then I had the pleasure of going to the Westminster Foundation lunch. I think, seeing all the resources that are available to the community in Westminster is really kind of a moving thing. They seem to have a nonprofit organization to serve just about every area of their community, whether it's, pregnant teen moms or people suffering with homelessness or whatever it may be. They seem to have support there, and it was just kind of moving because it's something that we don't see in all of our communities. So attending that was really quite special. And then I was sad to miss the Rocky Mountain Partnership lunch. I was home with COVID. Yes, COVID is still around, unfortunately, but it sounded like it was a really great evening. There was tons of positive feedback, and hopefully our other board members who attended can give us a good update on that. I want to thank everyone for passing the bond, and I know that it was sad that the mill did not pass, and like Gadowski had mentioned, we're going to have to run it again. But I do think with failure comes opportunity to learn and do better, and look for innovative, creative solutions to problems sometimes. And as I've heard our cabinet say, especially Superintendent Gadowski say, that we really strive to be innovative, and I think this gives us a space and time to do that a little bit while we look at how we can hopefully get this mill passed in the future. And I will end by wishing everybody a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving. Hopefully it doesn't snow too much, there's no delayed flights, and the turkey and whatever meal you're enjoying with whoever you are accompanied with is fantastic and wonderful, and everyone takes the much needed and much deserved time off. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Mars Holson.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to thank everyone again who voted, and thank you for those who passed our bond. I too know it's been a hard year, but I think as we kind of dive into Adams 12, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about our district and the funding we have. So having those conversations continually is very important, but I appreciate everyone who voted for all things. On the tail end of that, I also wanted to say that November has Trans Awareness Day in it, and I want to make sure that people know that Adams 12 is a accepting and welcoming place for all of our students, including our newcomers and our LGBTQ students, regardless of whatever the rhetoric is. Adams will always be a welcoming place. So I was excited to go to the District Equity and Engagement Committee meeting this month and got a lot of good information. We had a great presentation from Great Education Colorado. And as a mom, I got to attend Studio School's Mask Parade, which was a lot of fun for Halloween. It's a kind of a cool way to celebrate Halloween than your traditional costumes. I took a tour of Mountain View Elementary, which was always fun, as I'm a graduate of Mountain View Elementary, and the third graders were reading The Wild Robot, and I had just taken my daughter to see it, so I got to actually have something to talk to them about. And then Director Assad Lucas and I attended the Broomfield Area Chamber Corporate Leadership Mixer, and got to talk to the hosts about a different way of welding they do. And we invited them to come tour our welding facility. So it was a lot of fun to get to do that. So thanks, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone as well.
Thank you. Paula?
Hi, everybody. It feels like a long time since we met. It was a good break. The first thing I want to do is just thank our veterans. I think that's an important acknowledgement to make. Like everyone here, we probably have several close family members who are veterans, and we're aware of the sacrifices that entails, the toll it can take on mental health and physical health and all other aspects of their lives, and we're grateful to them for making that sacrifice. The next thing I would like to do is acknowledge Native American Heritage Month as well. So a big thank you goes out to the teachers, parents, elders, kids who keep Native American history alive and vibrant in our culture so that we can all benefit from it. The next thing I wanted to share is I received a very interesting letter today with writing and signatures and everything. It was amazing. I didn't recognize it for a minute. But the mother shared very valid concerns. I think that a lot of people are feeling these concerns, and I think it's important that we as a district acknowledge them. And this mother wrote to me, and I'm kind of paraphrasing the beginning. I worry about how the public education system will serve my daughter, especially as she grows older. As someone who relied on public schools myself, I know how important they are for families like mine. I am increasingly worried about the erosion of public education, especially as we face federal level changes that could harm schools. The incoming administration's proposed abolition of the U.S. Department of Education and its push for school choice pose significant risks to equitable funding and resources for public schools. So she's not the first person who has approached me about her concerns. I've had other individuals approach me too. The Department of Education, for those of you who may not, well, everyone in this room is familiar, but for those of you who may not be familiar online, the Department of Education does a few key things that are vital for protecting our students. The first is they offer funding for special education purposes and for students from low-income backgrounds. It may not be a significant amount of funding. I think it's about, they contribute about 10% of their budget to public schools in the U.S., but I think we know here in Colorado, our special education services are already underfunded by the state. So losing any sort of revenue in that area is a valid concern. The other thing is that Title IX, I believe, is that the correct one? Offered through, a protection offered through the Department of Education protects LGBTQ students. It protects for gender purposes, et cetera. And I think that's it's a big concern for a lot of people as far as what would happen if that were removed. How would those protections be enforced? The additional factor, I think, is for our students who may be refugees and who may be immigrants. And there's a lot of trepidation out there right now, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. My perspective is always that I wanted to run for this office because I wanted to make sure that we meet the needs of all students, that we care about all students regardless of who they are or how they come to us. We support them for the person they are, and we help them grow and become active adults in our democracy. So that's the ideal I will continue to strive for, and I am willing to fight for that for our students.
Thank you, Paula. Amira?
Good evening. Yes, it has been a while. I missed the last board meeting. I was in international waters and then came home with COVID as well. So it was a treat. But yeah, no, it's good to be back. A lot's been going on since then. I just want to say thank you to our voters for passing our bond. I know there was the talk, it's like, oh, rebuild Thornton High, but that's really significant for the Southern Thornton community, and not just for the kids, the overall community. Parents that attended Thornton High, businesses, it's a pretty big deal, and it's a very, very exciting opportunity for that corridor, which is my neighborhood. And so I'm very excited to see. When I asked my senior this year if she was excited, she was just like, oh, yeah, I won't get to be, but I think kids, it's hard for them to conceptualize what that what that means and what that looks like. And so what I'm really excited about when she comes back to visit from college, when she sees it, the impact that will have on her and her understanding the meaning of it. As shared about the mill levy not passing, I'm scared about how we will compensate our educators, be competitive in that sense, how we can expand programming to the extent that we really want for our kids. I know that we will continue working diligently and hard to make sure we do what we can, and but yeah, getting out there and understanding what needs to be done, what the community wants, and how we can get that over the finish line. One of the things, the day after the election, I went and got a haircut that I had scheduled for a while, and I almost canceled, but I decided to go. It was a new salon because the woman I went to before left, and I ended up scheduling with the owner of the salon, and she's an Adams 12 graduate from North Glen High. She might have been there the year that you were a dean, but
she remembers.
she said it sounded familiar. But she shared how high school was not her thing. She almost dropped out, but decided just to plow through to the point that she was even able to graduate a semester early so she could start cosmetology school. Her dream was always to open up her own salon, and she worked and worked and worked and finally achieved that dream in 2019, only then for COVID to hit, and stressed about how to not to lose that dream, and she did it. She managed, and when I told her about possibly expanding, me being sad about the mill, but wanting to expand programming and cosmetology be one of them, she just shared how that would have been a game changer for her, for other students that she knows. She even employs former Adams 12 graduates that have gone that would have benefited from. So it felt good. I'm so glad I was there. I heard her story. It just really motivated me to continue to get back in and advocating for all kids. I was going to go into my dive too about Department of Education and what that means. Paula, I think, addressed it beautifully. The concerns, I think, too, especially having a child with a disability that falls under IDEA, it's pretty terrifying. That's kind of what I've been hearing from other parents as well, of what does this mean for our kids' protections. I just had the reevaluation process for both of my boys, and one rolled off of his IEP, and the other one has increased services because of his needs. And I was telling his teacher for visually impaired, I'm not worried about him. We know how to advocate. My husband and I work with disabilities in the disability world, but it's the parents who maybe don't and rely on these federal mandates to protect their kids and to help educate them, and they're really scared. And I think just acknowledging that and validating those fears. The other talk I've been having a lot with parents, especially, even my kids' friends' parents, is if mass deportations come down the chain, what that will look like for them. Many of them have been in the country for decades, and their children were born here, and having real fear of what that is. I think when you talk to parents, they come because this is a land of opportunity. I mean, and being a daughter of an immigrant, that he came because he had to support, I mean, he needed to support his family. He came from a home, a 2-bedroom apartment with 8 children and no water, no electricity, and had to give back to them. And that's what many of these families do. And I think they built a life, and their children know nothing. They don't know any different than their community here. And so I think, again, being very open and listening to these fears and concerns and how we can support in whatever ways we can. You know, one of the story, when I worked in school-based therapy as a refugee and asylum-seeking therapist, that was during a time when we were having a really large influx of unaccompanied minors coming into the country. And I remember thinking of how awful the conditions must be that parents would think it's better for their children to send them into a country that they don't know and hopefully find somebody, you know, a family member that might already be here. Because as a parent, I could never imagine doing that. And how fearful that is. And can't even comprehend how they believed in their heart of hearts that that was best for their kids. And I think there's so much misconception and misinformation around immigration, and so supporting our families around that. Other than that, excited to be back up here. We have a long holidays coming up. My last ask is, yes, with Thanksgiving, we have many families that don't have the privilege of celebrating the way that many of us are able to celebrate. So if there is any way you can give back, donations, support in any way, it would really make a major difference for a family or families. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and thanks.
Thank you. All right, yeah. I want to thank also the voters of Adams 12 for supporting our mill and bond, our bond, sorry, and those that supported the mill too. I did knock on a few doors this time around and got to talk to people in the community about the importance of public education. It seems like we have a few winners and a few losers every time in an election. I'm also grateful that Amendment 80 went down. That was a very nasty campaign. And I guess it just drives home, whether you realize it or not, that fighting for public education is a war, literally. There's those of us that support it, and there are those that are out there to destroy it. And that seems to be at the ballot more often than not. So I'm ready to keep fighting if I have to. On a lighter note, did you know that the district is almost 75 years old? And for some reason, somebody thought I would be a good person to be on the committee, since I've been around more than half of that. So I've met a couple of times with the committee, and we're talking about what we want that to look like, and we're getting to a place where Raquel's in charge of it, Williams, and she'll be recommending to senior staff some of our recommendations. I really have enjoyed doing that. I got to go to the North Glen Business Appreciation, and every year they do that, and Courtney was there too. And the North Glen STEM students make the party favors, and the engineering students, and so they have some really cute things that they make for the awards, and then the businesses in North Glen are honored, and and there are places that a lot of us know some of these places because North Glen is a big part of Adams 12. So we got to celebrate that, and then, of course, the Westminster Community Foundation, and then hearing Lisa Weil at the Equity Engagement meeting. Every time I hear Lisa from Great Ed talk about school finance, you'd think I would be an expert at it by now, but I always learn something from her. Then we had long-range planning, but I will talk more about that when it's that turn. I visited a couple schools. I did the dictionary thing with Rotary again. Went to Rocky Mountain Elementary, Cotton Creek Elementary, and Arapahoe Ridge Elementary. And past board president Mark Clark and I did Cotton Creek. We tend to do that one together every year. And he offers every year that whoever can spell the largest word in the dictionary, which is like 1,800 letters, that he'll tell Superintendent Godowski to give them a day off. So we feel pretty confident that that probably won't be happening. So safe bet. But anyway, it's always fun to go deliver the dictionaries, and the kids are so cute. I've done a couple of PBLs over at STEM Launch. I did one on getting people to vote yesterday, and I was there today. It was a first grade PBL on light pollution, and these first graders were just stinking cute. They were, and they couldn't stand still. But they got the concept down of what light pollution is and what to do about it. They all kind of had the same idea. And it's great that some of the people in our community from various places like the Audubon Society or CDOT will also come into our schools to give them feedback on their PBLs too. So it's a great community partnership. And then tomorrow we have another one. So 3 PBLs in a week, and I've been really busy over at STEM Launch. And something else that happened today over at STEM Launch, when I got there, I was rushing in at the last minute because I had dropped my son off at school, and the principal, Kate Claver, was on her way to a middle school staff meeting, so all the middle school teachers, and my son had most of them. And she goes, "Can you just come in and say hi?" And she goes, "Let me give you some background." She goes, "They're feeling a little dejected because of, what's going to happen next with diminishing money and all this kind of stuff." So in the 30 seconds that it took for me to walk with her, and she's really tall and has really long legs, so we were walking really fast. I went in there, and there's all my son's former teachers and colleagues of mine. And we talked for a minute, about how, we just got to keep plugging away. And I thank them for all the wonderful things they do, because they really do great things for our kids. And I'm honored to have been the beneficiary of that with my own child. Okay, so anyway, we will continue. I'm going to continue to advocate for the kids and to do what I can on the top end to make sure that protections are in place for them too, because there's a lot of unknowns and fears out there when it comes to public education, especially from the federal level. All right, board committee liaison reports. We'll start with the DAC.
So Dave, I might need your help clarifying precisely what Aaron suggested. So we had a very eventful DAC meeting about a week or two ago, and the first portion of it was about 2 things. We broke into 2 groups. One group was focused on looking at the results from the visit with what's the name of the charter school that's coming up for? New America. Thank you. I kept thinking New Horizon. I was flipping through it like a Rolodex. New America is coming up for renewal, and so they've done some site visits, and they were talking about their findings from those site visits. And the other half of the group focused on looking at data metrics that they thought might be valuable to consider in assessing the district's unified improvement plan or something to that effect. And we had some really great table conversations. Afterwards, we transitioned to discussing the survey, the spending survey that we send out. And the spending survey is where the group seemed to get a bit stuck. There's still a lot of confusion around what that spending survey should entail. And I think there's also a general, and I'll see if Dave agrees with me here, a general concern from one parent at least that they need to know how we're using those survey results. They need to see that it's being considered in some way. And I think that was a valid concern. But I think with the spending survey, one person in the groups, and this is where I might need your help, Dave, because I'm trying to remember the details, she suggested that the board discuss the possible stumbling blocks that may lay ahead of us as far as spending goes, particularly in relation to academic achievement, and sort of prioritize what kinds of questions we would like to hear from the general public about those spending priorities. Dave, was that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, I would say so. That's one of the areas where we landed. There was the difficulty with the spending survey is it's very difficult to get participation in it. They've tried to go through school accountability committees to do that. But the information is challenging to gather from the general public, even the SAC members, because they don't see the inner workings of what actually is going on and how most of those funds are really impacting kids in the classroom, because we know a lot of the money that we budget goes to staff, right? So there's not that visual ability to see. So there was a wondering about how to best gather information from the general public about the use of the monies in our budget to really impact academic achievement and growth for students.
And so essentially the ask for the Board of Education from that group is that we consider those, what I just mentioned, taking a look at possible spending barriers in the future and thinking of how we might offer suggestions on particular questions to ask on the survey. And also probably how to deliver the survey in a way where we get better results. And also the final piece is just how do we make visible to them that we have considered those results, and how are we taking action on it?
So on that topic, I'll just, while it's on the table, share a few thoughts. One is that, in my view, the board does set a number of spending priorities for me and staff in developing the budget each year. And so some of those things in your policy say that we need to have competitive compensation that's not 5% above or more than 5% below the market. So there's a pretty strong statement about how compensation should work. There are statements about what the board wants in reserve. So beyond the table reserve, 3 to 4% as a minimum supplemental amount of money in reserve, and a cap not to exceed 7%. So there's some things around savings that the board has said. There's expectations that are set in terms of how much deferred maintenance or aging building systems that remain unattended to that are permissible as a percentage of how many total building assets we have in the district. And I could go on and on and on, but I think one of the misperceptions is that the board hasn't set out its most critical values about what should be done with money. I think where some would like the board to go, and you could go if you want, although it's, some would say at odds with the policy governance philosophy, is what a lot of people want you to do is to say, spending priority 1 is reduce as many people of the ESC as possible. Spending priority number 2 is to keep class size as low as possible. Spending priority 3 is to make sure that we have art, music, and PE in every school, and on and on and on. And the policy governance model indicates that those are all means decisions that you're delegating to staff to decide what's the right mix of investment and staffing to accomplish the ends that you've set in terms of student growth and achievement. So it can be tricky that way. Another thought I have is I tend to attach greater value to insights from people who participate in SACs and other school-based groups around budget than I do the general public at large, because there's a lot of complexity around this budget that we talk about here that I think, as Lori said, each time she hears Lisa Weil talk, she learns something more about school funding. I learned things here and there as well, but this budget's incredibly complex, and a lot of folks, when they're completing those surveys, as Dave alluded to, really don't have a deep understanding about what's going on. I'm hopeful that members of SAC teams have a better understanding, and so for me, when there have been surveys of SAC folks around spending priorities, that carries a different and higher weight for me than just opening it up to the system at large. And then finally, one of the things I'm sensitive to, just given past surveys that we've done, sometimes with the community at large, is that it can create, depending on when you do it and how you do it, a lot of self-preservation behavior and attacking behavior so that you keep your job and you try to find the other parts in the system that you feel like are more vulnerable or more deserving of cuts. And we start having civil war factions within the district about, don't cut the arts. Yes, cut the arts. Don't cut teacher librarians, cut interventionists instead. And it just goes on and on and on. So I think in terms of heading down this path, timing's important, method's important, and what audience we ask for information's important. And really the starting point is, do you feel like there are more granular things than what you have in policy currently that you'd want to put in place in terms of operating limitations to help guide budget development? Because that would be the most useful place to start in terms of talking about how budget should be set for next year.
Does that help?
Absolutely.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to the discussion? Okay. Thank you, Chris, for that explanation. Okay. The FAC?
It was a relatively short FAC meeting. This group is fantastic. They're very to the point in their conversations. They heard from the Director of HR, Mila Shepard, discussed a little bit of what kind of vacancies we have, what it means to fill them, different kind of compensation levels, and really just kind of went through and monitored and make sure that we were in compliance with all the different financial things we need to be, and that's about it. Did I miss anything back there, Finance Department? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. LRPAC, we met. We talked about the October count and what it means and the trends. And then we also talked about the choice policy that we have, and talked about some of the changes in the profiles of newcomers. We've had less Spanish speaking and more in Dari and Pashto. Also, there's been a lot of discussion around the bylaw changes and the composition of the LRPAC. And one of the things being tossed around was who are the voting members. We had to vote on who the voting members would be. I've never been a board member, has never been a voting member, but they were talking about it, and I was pretty much just listening to what they decided they wanted to do. And they came up with that do they want a regular administrator at each level, or do they want to rotate them based on whatever the topic is? Because taking administrators out of their buildings on a regular basis, they already have a lot of other stuff going on, so it's kind of asking a lot of them. And then also they voted on a chair and a vice chair. So it doesn't say who they are, but it was wasn't it Kim Schaefer and Bo? Do you remember off the top of your head who are the chair and the vice chair now? Of Adam.
Correct.
Is the chair?
Vice.
Vice, and Kim is the chair.
Correct.
Okay, I did remember that. And we were talking about, Margie talked to us a little bit about what they were thinking for a central warehouse and kitchen site. There are 2 sites to think about. One is south of the North Stadium, and then one is over south of this building here. So she gave us the pros and cons of each, and they actually voted on which one they thought was the best option, and they went with the recommendation of the one by the stadium. And then we meet again tomorrow. So, okay. Public comment.
Nobody has signed up for public comment tonight.
Thank you. We already, on to board business, we already did policy matters, but now we have to talk about our legislative platform because the legislative session is going to be here before we know it. And also, it gives us some grounding for our dinner with the legislatures that we'll have on I think the 11th of December. It's a Tuesday. And then also, we always prepare a nice document for us to share with them, and then also for us to take to DC when we go in January. So looking at the platform, is there any changes that anybody might suggest? And this is what we'll talk about tonight, and then we'll have it edited and come back and vote on it next time.
I have a question.
Yes.
And it is on page 2. And it's just there's a warrant, and I can't quite figure out what it is. Adams 12 5-star schools supports legislation that would help districts address long-term impacts from the COVID pandemic, including student learning loss, increased student mental health and behavioral issues, increases in student and family basic needs, continued staffing shortages, and further growth of deferred maintenance. I'm just wondering, with regard to the COVID pandemic, the after effect, how is it continuing to contribute to some of these items? I was thinking in terms of particularly deferred maintenance. Is it because of expenses that we had to, funding we had to provide during the COVID pandemic that is leading to deferred maintenance now? So it's just me trying to make a connection between those.
I'd be inclined to delete the reference to deferred maintenance.
Okay. I'm just saying I just didn't know if there was a connection I was supposed to be making that I wasn't making.
So then you're suggesting to remove that?
Sure.
Okay.
And I'm also wondering if on the charter school related equity priorities, we talk about at the very top of page 3, Adams 12 5-star schools supports legislation that improves the relationship and academic accountability and fiscal responsibility between charter schools and their authorizing public school district. And we mentioned that does not support the state providing supplemental revenue to charter schools that are authorized through the Charter School Institute. I wonder if we should also mention, as one of the reasons for why we don't support it, that we cannot provide an adequate safeguard for students who attend those schools in relation to SPED and ELL, because we do not have data or insight into how they are doing in those schools. So there's a gap in our ability to protect our kids in the district. So I just wonder if we should add something to that effect.
Did you get that, Stephanie? Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to add or subtract? One thing I'd like to see in here, I think would be under adequacy and equity of school funding. Something specifically to public funds should be for public schools. And we oppose vouchers.
Perhaps we should also, in that vein, just to make clear to our charter school partners, Stargate and Westgate and PRA, and I mean, we firmly support our public charter schools that have the district oversight. The concern is just really that oversight is missing in other cases.
Do you want to stick that in the section on charter school related equity priorities?
Sure, yes.
Keep it succinct.
No, I think I would second adding something in there about wanting our legislators to understand and advocate. Hopefully that public dollars should go to public schools where there's the financial, or where there's that accountability and what the money is intended to do. and not be, and not have ways that it can be circumvented to private businesses.
I have a question. Does that include UPK?
So then we could put K-12 in the sentence.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I would raise in the adequacy and equity section, the first bullet. I think it's a little bit of a complicated sentence, but I think the gist of it is we want the BS factor eliminated, which has now been done. I think there's a way to rephrase that bullet or others in here to bring attention at a high level about we don't want the BS factor to essentially be indirectly reestablished through eliminating the 4-year averaging provision. And I think there's also room in the platform to raise attention about the inequities created by mill levy override disparities in our state. So if those were things of interest, staff could work on some language to bring back or to incorporate in the platform.
I support that.
Yep.
Same.
Is that, any more adjustments? All right, so then Stephanie, you'll put the edits in and throw it back to us to look at, and we can discuss and hopefully vote on it next time, so it's ready for, will we meet before the legislative dinner? No, but at least it'll be ready by the session, and we can certainly talk about some of the things that we have an interest in. All right, thank you for that conversation. And then director districts, okay. So we're obligated to look at director districts every couple of years and by statute. So Michael Botello went through and crunched the numbers, and a lot of it's based on the 2020 census, which is before we looked at this last time even, but basically looked at the makeup of it, and the recommendation is that the numbers have not changed enough to warrant adjusting any of the boundaries. Is there any discussion?
I would like to see maybe one day we scramble this whole map up and do it a little differently when looking back at our school board elections. I want to say there's at least one seat almost every election, if not every other election, where it's one person uncontested. And even when we're looking at who is running or who may run some of these areas, it's harder to find people that are interested or able. And so kind of digging into a little bit more of like, yes, I understand this is the population, but what are the demographics of each of these areas to make sure that we have good, adequate representation of the board and our community. Obviously, our community is not 100% female. And so doing just some creative thinking around what these boundaries could be in the future, I think would be a wonderful thing.
Comments?
I think, for me, yeah, I don't necessarily disagree that it's sometimes hard to find people in some of these director districts. I guess what I appreciate about them is kind of be centered around a community. And like, I was sharing in my comments of being in District 4, that's my community. And my kids attend all of the schools, except I guess my middle schooler is at Century. But I've lived in that area for many years, 15, 16, 17-ish years. And I think if we adjust too much, it might lose some of that community focus. And so that's one thing, just really being cognizant about if that discussion ever comes up, just making sure it stays really community focused. So then people that are representing that director of district understands that area that they're being elected for to represent, so.
To your point, like, I completely agree with you. And looking at, District 3, which is my district, running from Holly all the way over to Sheridan and Broomfield, that's like 3 communities in there. Like, there isn't that same sense of community. And I would argue, I live close to Horizon High School, and my community is currently comprised of District 3 and District 2. And so just doing a little bit of, adjusting, I think, to make sure that, to your point, we are including a whole community and not extending anyone too far, I think would be great.
The only thing, I can really add to the conversation is that I'm not sure that reconfiguring the map or even adding more districts would help with the representation piece that you bring up. I think that has more to do with the nature of the work. Does that make sense? I am privileged to have a very flexible position and a very, well, sometimes supportive husband. It depends on whether there's math homework to be done. And this job, there's an equity piece in that people from lower income backgrounds who don't have a lot of extra time and who have childcare problems, it's really difficult to take on this kind of work. And I think that is probably more of the issue than any sort of service we can bring through reorganizing the maps. That's still going to be the key issue. So
I'll add my 3 cents worth. I think the way they're designed now, they kind of follow a socioeconomic gradient because, the title schools are in District 1 and 4 for the most part. Maybe creeping up a little bit into 2 and 5, but it is a gradient that's very obvious in our school district. The other thing too is that I think to redraw these would take a lot of staff time that I think is unnecessary because they're very busy too doing other things. The other thing I'll throw out there to consider down the road is there is a state law that says we can pay our school board members. Any of us sitting here now would not reap that benefit until they were, well, I'm termed out, so it would never affect me. And if it was something we decided to do in the next year, it would only affect Director District 4 and 3. And then in 2 years later, it would influence 1, 2, and 5. That's something else to think about because we are allowed to approve that. That might bring out the people that you were talking about that are, have issues with childcare and their jobs and whatnot. And there are several school districts that do pay their directors. It's not a lot, but it's something for the time that they spend doing this. So, yeah.
Well, and I think too, like, about that, listening, having this conversation, and Paula, you bringing up the challenges of that, and pay is, many families in District 4, District 1 are dual incomers, and some of them have multiple jobs, and so, yeah, being able to say, this is every other Wednesday night, and occasionally these special board meetings, and these conferences to travel to, and all that can be burdensome. And so having just maybe some compensation would help be more, attract people who are more representative of our population.
And for the record, I'm not asking for money. I'd probably just donate it right back to the district anyway.
No, but
but I do think, I think it's a valid way to get better representation, to allow more opportunity to be involved in things like this, that we have to be the voice for everyone, right?
Well, and, we've seen a few shifts over the years in boundaries of our director districts. Funny story, well, a funny fact, I guess, more than anything, is where I live. Lee Combs was the president of this board, I don't know, long time ago, like early 2000s, mid 2000s. And he was the director district was District 5. And Lee lives right on the other side of my fence. So my neighborhood used to be in 5. And so, you know, there have been adjustments over the years, but like I said, it's based on state statute of population. Well, there's no action to be taken here. Phil, do we vote on this next time or not vote on it?
If you're not making changes, you don't have to vote on anything. You just have to review it every 4 years, and this takes care of that obligation. Next, have to look at this in 2028.
Okay, well, consider it discussed.
We took action in 2022
Right.
because we got off schedule. There was some other things going on in 2020, so it got kicked to 2022.
I do want to thank Director Potter, though, for bringing up a valid representation issue.
Okay, then on to minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the work-study session and regular board meeting of October 23rd, 2024, as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, call a vote.
Director Assad Lucas,
Aye.
Director Battistelli,
Aye.
Director Goldstein,
Aye.
Director Marsh Holshin,
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
All right, on to monitoring reports that we haven't done yet. Internal monitoring report, ends policy 1.0, schooling graduates, dropouts, combined data report. I will entertain a motion to acknowledge that the board has received a monitoring report as of November 20th, 2024, for the period July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024, of the superintendent concerning board policy 1.0, schooling, graduates, dropouts, combined data report, and finds the superintendent's interpretations are reasonable and supported by data that is relevant, justified, and complete.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Hi, Dave.
Good evening, Superintendent Godowski, board members. This is a new report. Formerly, 1.1 had data elements as well as the curricular and 21st century skill elements. Those have been divided. And so this report is new. It really is a very dense data report. There's a lot of information there with some analysis statements, as well as at the end, there's a page of actions that are included in the UIP and other actions that are being taken to address some of the issues we see in the data or ways to improve things that are already going well. So that's the structure of the report. In conversation with Superintendent Godowski, we thought we'd run through the different data elements, talk about some general takeaways, and then the actions that we're taking in case you had any questions about the actions related to the different elements. I'm sure a number of them look familiar from the UIP, especially around growth and achievement, but there are some things like that are going on related to other things around discipline, attendance that may have been new. So starting with the report, starting with the demographic data, the main shifts we've seen when we compare pre-pandemic to this last year, we're reporting on 23-24 data, are some shifts in ethnicity, most notably an increase in Hispanics percentage of students and a decrease in percentage of white students, about 6.9% for whites and an increase of 4.1% for Hispanic students. A couple of increases in terms of special programs, but the largest increase was for free reduced lunch of 13.4%, although based on what we heard in work study, that may be coming back down when we get the 24-25 data based on the October count. We'll have to see where that comes in when that's finalized. So in terms of demographics, I didn't know if you had any questions around that particular area. Moving into the report then, there's a lot of data that should look familiar to you from achievement and growth, where we provide all sorts of data around mean and scale scores and growth percentiles by a variety of subgroups. In terms of the state achievement data, the largest concerns were our comparisons to pre-pandemic data, especially for elementary and middle school ELA and then middle school math. We're lagging quite a bit where we were pre-pandemic. SAT was only listed, if you know we give PSAT in grades 9 and 10 and SAT in 11. It's really impossible to combine those data because the tests are on different scales. So I chose to report the SAT because that tends to gets the most views, so to speak, of most interest. There's mixed performance in terms of the SAT, some up, some down. And so that's what we tend to see. There's more of our concerns in both growth and achievement are at elementary and middle school levels. In terms of some things we're doing around both achievement and growth data on that last page, there's a lot of work being done around Benchmark Advanced in terms of both the reading and the writing at the elementary level. There's a look at looking at adopting a new curriculum for the middle school level, so we would have a common curriculum for all our 6 through 8 students. There's assessment work being done to provide assessments for middle schools so that they have an understanding of what the focus standards are really asking for. That was requested by middle school principals specifically. We're going to look at adopting an elementary math resource, which would help with that growth we're seeing at the elementary level. We're aligning all district structures around grade level planning and focus on rigor. That's across the board. All different departments within the district are focused on planning and rigor and student engagement. And then lastly, you'll see that last bullet is around the CTE. They're adopting new GVCs, a guaranteed viable curriculum, and they're weaving in math and literacy standards that exist. So those are the things we're really trying to do to improve both achievement and growth. In terms of growth, the largest concerns are what we're seeing in terms of elementary and middle school ELA and math. We're just not seeing the growth compared to where we were pre-pandemic for those two levels in both subject areas. And so that is our major concern. I will point out that access growth has continued to be strong. The vast majority of grade levels and subgroups are above the 50th percentile, which is average growth. That's why you see a lot of green for access. We've traditionally done very well at each level for that. We don't want to see some of the declines we were seeing, particularly at middle school, but it's still above that state expectation of average growth. Any questions on achievement and growth data? Okay, very happy point around AP data. What you'll see is the percentage of kids earning a 3+ who are taking the test is up. That is also up over where we were pre-pandemic. We've seen that rise year over year. It's a point of pride. We are also seeing more students taking the classes and more students passing the test. So it's not just there's fewer and fewer kids taking it. So that's really a point of pride, particularly around that achievement for those students who are electing to take those courses. In terms of graduation rate and dropout rate data, now we're transitioning to data around post-secondary and workforce readiness indicators. One thing you'll note in the table in that 2024 column, those are predicted values right now. We should get the data sometime in December, the final data from the state. In talking with our IT department, we feel like those estimates are pretty close. We don't expect those to change significantly from what you see listed here. Obviously, this is the first time we're doing this early, so we'll learn more as we go through this cycle that can apply to next cycle. Grad rate, again, is generally a positive trend that we're seeing as we move from pre-pandemic to pandemic. So a lot of kudos go to everyone in the system, particularly our high schools who are facilitating that closure of getting kids to the finish line in terms of their diplomas. Dropout rate is not quite so positive. We're seeing it's not changed much, but it's not coming back down to where we were quite before the pandemic. We'd like to see that tick down even more. And so that is not quite as positive, but there's not huge changes there. We would still like to see that tick down further. What I can tell you in terms of what high schools are doing around these data and then the failure rate data that we're going to talk about in a minute is that each building has been given about a 0.4 FTE to come up with a customized school plan of how do we deal with the Fs and how are we monitoring dropouts and graduates. So there's a lot of school-specific plans that are being done. We're not saying this is how you shall do it because we know the needs at a Thornton are very different than a Legacy, than a Horizon versus a Mountain Range. Yes?
I think I asked this before, but I can't remember. Does the dropout rates, are we able to track if they dropped out and earned their GED?
The technically, what happens with us is if they go through a GED program that is affiliated with us, then we can see that technically they're not a graduate, they're a completer. And so that won't show in the graduation rate. There's another rate called a completion rate, which is very similar to graduation rate, but does include students who graduate with or exit with a GED.
But if they drop out and do a GED program not affiliated with Adams, will we not capture that?
What will happen with dropout, it's a tricky calculation. It's an annual calculation. So what happens is if a student is enrolled with Adams 12, leaves our district, and does not enroll anywhere else in the state, or we have proof that they've enrolled out of state, then they're a dropout for us. Once they enroll in a different program or a different district, then they are no longer a dropout for us within that school year. So if a student enrolls in a GED program, completes the GED program, they would not be a dropout for us. They would be a completer for wherever they completed the GED. It's a little bit of a tricky statistic, and that's why we have to work so closely with the Colorado Department of Education, because they do a lot of that reconciliation when kids leave our district to see where they did go and did they complete. And then lastly, in terms of the 9th grade Fs, obviously the data there is concerning. We're seeing an increased percentage of Fs across the board, regardless of core subject area, and it's really increased every year. The percentage of Fs has increased every year, pretty much across the board. One of the really stark data points there is when you look at the change for males versus females. The female F rate, regardless of subject, is increasing much more than the male F rate, and I don't have a good rationale or reason for that, but it's one of the things that shows up in the data. Interestingly, I was taken aback a little bit. I thought the highest F rates might be in math, but that's not the case. It's science, actually, that has the highest, with ELA and social studies about the same, and math actually the lowest F rate. And I think that's can be attributed to a degree of the emphasis that schools have put on math and thinking about how do we get kids another bite at that apple or intervention so they don't fail. That's a hypothesis, but I was a little surprised to see those data myself. Questions in terms of grad rate, dropout rate, or 9th grade Fs? Okay, in terms of chronic absenteeism, those data are generally good. We're seeing positive trends back from, and realistically, I've pulled these data directly from the state website, and they only list data for the 3 years that I've included that are disaggregated. So we're seeing positive trends for us. However, I would caution that back in 2018-19, we don't have disaggregated data. The Adams 12's chronic absenteeism rate then was 25.6%. So we're still not where we were prior to the pandemic, and I don't think we're surprised by that, but we are trending in the correct direction. Again, it's going to be a major emphasis. In terms of chronic absenteeism, some of the things that our district is engaged in is we've implemented 5-star student insights. It's a data tracking program so that there can be more real-time tracking of attendance data. Also, there's an engagement being led by district staff in a national cohort run by Digital Promise. And so we're looking nationally about what are some promising ideas and interventions that might be applicable here in Adams 12. And lastly, we're also engaging with an Adams County attendance task force on much the same work. So we're hoping the national view and then the Adams County view will give us some ideas about how to continue keeping or reducing that chronic absenteeism rate. Questions there? Okay, in terms of discipline, the data are, I pulled these directly from, again, the CDE website. The the discipline incidents by in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and expulsion, they've only reported those data for the last 3 years. Overall, we're seeing mainly declines, but there are some mixed data there. Currently, we're working, I'll get to the steps we're taking. The second table on incidents by type, this is a baseline year. We've only have 1 year of data from CDE, but interestingly, by far the most common incident is other violation of code of conduct. And so part of the work that we're engaged in the discipline space is trying to get a better understanding of what that is, because that can be a whole range of outcomes or reasons for discipline. So again, we're implementing that 5-star student insights to really look at the data granularly at the student level and at the school level. Lori Bela and her team in student engagement initiatives are revising the discipline matrix and doing training on that with all deans and administrators to ensure we have a better, more consistent understanding of the outcomes for students and prioritizing non-exclusionary discipline rather than going immediately to exclusionary discipline unless it's warranted. Obviously, sometimes it is warranted. There's a multidisciplinary team that's looking at every expulsion and looking at all the information around it so we can get an understanding of the particular case. We don't have that many expulsions, and so they're meeting weekly to go through each of those referrals. And then lastly, we're currently conducting a systemic analysis to look at out-of-school suspensions at every secondary school to check how does that proportionality of out-of-school suspension align with that school's population to see if we are seeing disproportionality. Because what happens when you roll that data up to the district level, where the discipline is occurring can skew the overall data. If I have a lot of discipline occurring at schools where there's a large minority population, that can skew the overall data, whereas at the school, it may not be disproportional. So we're undergoing that investigation right now. I've gotten an initial round of data, but I need to meet with Lori and her team about that. So we are doing a lot of digging around this disciplinary data that we have. And then lastly, you'll see the Panorama survey data. The good news is for the student competencies, that's where students are reporting on their own personal competencies. We're seeing good data generally at both the 3 through 5 and 6 through 12 levels. For the school supports and environment, we're seeing different data. At the elementary, we're seeing positive trends, whereas at the secondary, we're not seeing positive trends. We've seen some declines around that school supports and environment. And so one of the things we're engaged in there, Matt Schmidt, is working with schools to coordinate, I believe it's 5 schools right now, capturing kids' hearts, which is really a way to create that more welcoming, engaging, supportive environment, and we hope that we'll see positive results with the Panorama survey there. The last thing I'd add is Superintendent Godowski, throughout the beginning of this year, has been engaging with principals and DTEA representatives around hearing all of their particular concerns and thoughts about how the district is functioning and our support for schools, for principals and DTEA, and we're gathering feedback on that to then think about what do we do moving forward, what do we keep in place, what do we add, what do we change? And so that's another engagement that we're working on in the district to really look at these data and try and make sense of them and put them on a more positive trajectory. So that's my kind of high-level summary. I realize there's a lot of data there, and I just wanted to hit a few points with you, but I'm open to any questions you may have.
I have no questions. I'm just thrilled. I love it because it's very data rich, but it also helps paint a more complex picture that really helps us understand what's happening in schools. I think sometimes people want to just automatically go to the standardized tests, and schools are doing bad on standardized tests. And I'm not saying that's this district, but then all of the resources are put towards how do we help them improve there. But there are so many other factors and nuances and details going on in the background that can have such a dramatic effect on the overall performance of a district. And I think this captures it nicely. This is a great data portrait.
Two quick adds. I'll just say procedurally, getting back to policy governance and the discussion we've had a couple times tonight. This is a non-standard approach to monitoring, but given what we've heard from the board, it feels like a more comprehensive picture than some of the narrow data demands, and existing policy would be helpful. So if you feel like this meets the mark, we'll continue this path in the future. And then the second thing that Dave alluded to near the end is we have done a lot of listening. There's a lot of opportunities for improvement and change in our system. And we had a principal meeting last week where we shared lots of, here's what we're hearing from you in terms of the most pressing, important themes for us to change. Everything from we need different and better support for working with dysregulated kids to we want to see the vision for professional learning for the full course of the year in late spring, summer, start of the school year so that we can do some things at the building level to align. We'd like to see some changes in just the content of professional learning, and on and on and on. And as we tested that out with principals, it was, yeah, you've heard us. And so the next step at the December principal meeting will be to share, this is what our plan looks like in terms of adjustments and tweaks. We'll share that with you after that meeting. But for me, it's an exciting time. There's a lot of red on a lot of the pages that you see in this report in terms of declines compared to the pre-pandemic time that I know a lot of us have a lot of urgency to change and to move kids to a more effective place, and this feedback will help us get there.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Call the vote.
Director Assad Lucas.
Aye.
Director Battistelli.
Aye.
Director Goldstein.
Aye.
Director Marsh Holshin.
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
Okay. Number 2, internal monitoring report, operating limitations policy 2.4, financial condition and activities, July 1st through September 30th. I will entertain a motion to acknowledge the board has received a monitoring report as of November 20th, 2024, for the period July 1, 2024 through September 30th, 2024, of the superintendent concerning board policy 2.4, financial condition and activities, and finds the superintendent's interpretations are reasonable and supported by data that is relevant, justified, and complete.
So moved.
Second.
Dina?
Good evening, board. Stephanie's looking. It looks like maybe I failed to give her the presentation, and so if you didn't get that, I apologize in advance. From Veterans Day? I hope. If not, I will walk you through the monitoring report. Do you have the presentation or the financials?
We have 3 things. We have,
We have the quarterly financial report.
and then the internal monitoring report PDF. We have it's sort of a PowerPoint. It's a PDF.
Yeah.
Financial condition activities.
Okay,
internal.
good. I swear I did it, but maybe I forgot. I am a little tired tonight. So, what they can see? Thank you.
I think this is probably what you're,
That's right. Yep, that's it.
do you want to keep this?
Yeah, if I could see it, that will help me go through it. So you all can see it, we just won't be projecting it, which is fine. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so we have the presentation, and so as we've done in prior board meetings, we've talked through what is the internal monitoring report looking for. We're monitoring, do we have adequate reserves and fund balance? What's our cash position, liquidity, and investments? How are we doing as a district with our accounts payable and receivables? Monitoring our bonds, borrowing, mill levy overrides, and bond tracking, the spending of the bonds tracking, and then audit and internal controls. I'm just going to go through a few highlights of the monitoring report. The good news is you have the report, and we report compliance on all of the areas through September 30th. Okay, so slide, I don't have page numbers because it's a PDF, I apologize. But the monitoring fund balance and reserves, it's explaining what we're looking for throughout the monitoring report with some of the different sections. And we go to the next slide, we have a graph that shows where our board reserves are, where the 4% floor is, where the 8% ceiling is. And you can see that our over the last 4 years, we've stayed well within those parameters. And I feel like the district has done a really good job in budgeting to ensure we spend as much of our reserves as we can to keep programs going, but maintaining the board's. Did I break? Can you guys hear me? Thank you. Okay, so you guys ready for me to go back? Okay. So that first graph shows you where we are with our reserves. We're well within board policy, 4%, and this is what we're forecasting through the end of the fiscal year as of September 30th. And then we look at monitoring the cash investments and liquidity. And so when we go to the next graph, it shows our total unrestricted cash with our restricted cash. The light blue bar is the restricted, the big purple is unrestricted, and then the green line that goes across is our monthly expenditures. And so you can see our liquidity is very good. Aaron talked a little bit about that in the study session. I elbowed him and said, "You took the one really cool thing I had to share, thanks." So I'm going to share it with you anyway. The reason our cash liquidity is better than what you've seen in prior years is because of a change made in the way we're being funded for the state's portion of our School Finance Act. So in the past, they took the projected amount, divided it by 12, and gave it to us in 12 equal-ish installments. Now they're dividing it by closer to 9. And on the quarterly financial reports, in the budget to actual in prior years, we're typically at this point in time have received about 25% of our state equalization funding. Currently I have it right in front of me, but it's around 33.5%. So you can see that increase in that state equalization earlier is helping our liquidity. And Aaron also pointed out the other awesome thing is our investment earnings are significantly higher, and it's directly because we have more cash on hand to earn interest than we have in prior years, along with the higher interest rates. For the accounts payable and receivable, one of the big areas that we look at is, are we paying our obligations on time? And if we aren't, are we incurring late fees or penalties? in aggregate, we're to report to the board if it's over $1,000. We do not have any of those to report year to date. All right, and then we provide information about the tracking of bond spending and mill levy overrides. And so there's detailed information really on the mill levy overrides for the last bond. We've really spent all of those bond proceeds. There's still some dollars in there that are related to interest earnings and other cash that gets deposited to the project fund. But the bond proceeds themselves have been nearly fully spent, all of them on approved projects. And then we get to our monitoring, audit, compliance, and internal controls. You received an updated monitoring report because we had a section that I failed to update, and that's on when the FAC has reviewed internal controls. The last time they reviewed them was actually in October of the October 24th. We have that it will happen in October because the report is as of September, so it's a little weird acting like October's in the future, but as of September it was in the future. So that happened in October, and the FAC was able to see that agree that we're following our internal controls. So that's really all I have for you. I shared the information in the quarterly financial statements, and again, we are reporting compliance. So any questions?
Any questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Director Assad Lucas.
Aye.
Director Battistelli.
Aye.
Director Goldstein.
Aye.
Director Marsh-Holshen.
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
Okay. We get to skip number 3 because we already did it. On to the consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve the personnel actions as listed: resignations and terminations, transfers and reassignments, employment and leaves of absence.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussions?
Director Assad Lucas.
Aye.
Director Battistelli.
Aye.
Director Goldstein.
Aye.
Director Marsh-Holshen.
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
Okay, future agenda items. We are going to CASB, December 5th through the 7th. Then we come back and we have our dinner with our legislators. We invited not just the state House and state Senate, but we invited congressional districts 6 and 7, state school board and congressional Congress people. No, just 7 and 8. Just 7 and 8, because that's the 2 that are in Adams 12. We haven't heard back from them, but Tanya and Heather too are collecting RSVPs because they'll be a part of it too. That's December 10th. December 11th, our regular meeting. You can see here the work study. You're going to learn more about how we're going to do the 75th anniversary and rebranding. Safety update. Anything anybody wants to add? No. Okay. So we just have the one meeting in December, right? The regular meeting. The year's half over. On that note, I'm going to call us adjourned.